So here we are coming down the home stretch. We're into the last lecture you're going to have from me. Um, and in this lecture, we're going to be talking about costing systems, and we're going to be talking about standard costing systems or simple costing systems, sometimes called. And then we're going to be talking about activity-based costing or complex costing systems. Um, and the relative merits of the two and who uses what and why and so forth. So we'll be talking about those systems, and once again, I'm not going to ask you to learn how to use the systems because we don't have a long enough course to be able to do that, but it's important that you understand the differences and why companies use one or another and what those systems do. So basically, costing systems are all about trying to assign overhead, or indirect costs is another word for overhead. So how do we assign indirect costs? And there are relatively simple ways to do so, but those simple ways sometimes result in incorrect or unrealistic cost allocation. And then there are complex methods that result in realistic cost allocation. So those are kind of the processes that we need to go with. So when we don't produce very many goods, different kinds of goods, and we don't have very many indirect costs, simple systems work really well because we're not trying to allocate very much overhead, and we don't have to allocate it to very many items or products. So therefore, if you have a simple system driven by, let's say, labor hours or machine hours or something like that, space used in a particular building, any number of cost drivers are possible, you tend to end up with a reasonable answer, and you don't spend a lot of money or time getting that reasonable answer. So we're going to use broad cost drivers to allocate costs uniformly rather than breaking it down to a more detailed or granular level. And for some kinds of businesses, that works just fine. When there's lots of products and or lots of indirect costs, when indirect costs are a material item, you can end up with overcosting or undercosting by using simple or broad averaging. And that's the problem with the simple systems. When you have a complex production process with lots of different inputs, you sometimes get really bad answers from broad averaging. So what you end up with is overcosting and undercosting. If you have an overcosted product, so you have more costs allocated to that product, that means that some other product is undercosted, has less costs allocated, because the total costs here don't change. It's just where we allocate the costs. So which product that we're producing do we allocate the cost to? So when if you have an overcosted product, it doesn't use as many of the resources as we're charging to it, but it's allocated to, those resources are allocated to it, and therefore you end up with an idea that this product costs more than it actually does to produce. And the same happens with undercosting. If we've underallocated costs, then we think that this product is less expensive to produce than it actually is. So the overcosted product looks less profitable, and the undercosted product seems more profitable. And that leads to bad decision making. You decide to reduce the price on the undercosted product, sell it too cheaply, or sell the overcosted product too expensively so we don't sell very many of them, or any number of things can happen that we make bad decisions because we have bad cost data. And you have to always think that the cost data overall is going to be unchanged. It's just how we're allocating it within the group of products that we produce. So I'm going to give you a simple example, as simple as I can make it anyway. It's still not exactly simple, I don't think, but it's pretty simple. And actually, one of the products is called Simple, so that makes it simple. So we're going to look at simple lenses, of which we produce 60,000, and we're going to look at complex lenses, of which we produce 15,000. So these are lenses for something, binoculars or something. So we're producing these lenses, and we have simple ones and complex ones. And the simple ones, we can track the direct materials for both products quite well. They have direct materials of 1,000,001 and direct labor of 600,000 and so forth. So our totals are 1,000,008 in materials, 795 in direct labor. So total direct costs 2,595. We're not going to mess with those direct costs at all. They're direct. We're directly tracing those costs to these items. We're assuming, well, we can probably assume, I guess, is that this is pretty accurate. The real problem comes in this almost $2.4 million of indirect costs. How do we allocate the indirect costs to these two different products? And in this simple costing system, we're allocating them using the direct labor as the allocation. So direct labor, 600 and 195, 795. Okay, so if we've used 600,000 over 795 for the simple, then we're going to allocate the indirect cost the same way. So that's the ratio, 600, 795. So we're going to give the simple lenses the cost 1,000,008 in indirect costs. We're going to give the complex lenses 585,000 in indirect costs. So our total cost ends up at 3.5 and 1.4, and our unit cost at this level of production, $58.75 and $97. So that's a simple costing method. We've taken all of our indirect costs, we've put them together in a pool, and then we've allocated the pool using a cost driver, and in this case we used direct labor as the cost driver. So we've used that ratio of 600 to 795 and 195 to 795 to allocate the indirect costs. That's a standard or a simple costing system. And it works in some cases. It can give you a pretty darn good answer, and it's not that hard to do. We can do that without spending a huge amount of time and effort to allocate those costs. So all our indirect costs, we've got almost 40,000 direct labor hours, $60 per hour. We're going to use that to allocate, and then the direct materials and direct labor we're going to allocate, and that becomes our cost. The cost object is the two kinds of lenses. So that's the simple one. Now let's look at a complex or an activity-based costing system. With activity-based costing systems, we want to take and break down the activities necessary to produce the product into pieces. Each activity is then going to be looked at, and we're going to try to figure out what's the best way to allocate that activity to the products. Rather than allocating all these activities together, we're going to allocate them separately. So here we've got design, we've got setup, molding machines, machine operation, shipment setup, distribution, and administration. Each one of these things we've gone and looked at, and the indirect costs increase with more complex molds, more parts, and larger surface area. So we're going to use square feet of surface area to allocate costs for between complex and simple lenses. So we need to know square feet. We have $450,000. We're going to allocate it based on square feet. And that comes to, I think, $4,500 per square foot. Then setup molding machines, indirect costs increase with setup hours. So we're going to use setup hours as our cost driver. And our setup hours is $150 per setup hour to divide up the $300,000 of indirect costs for setup. Machine operations, we have $638,000 spent on machine operations, and we can allocate these based on the number of machine hours used by each product, and it's $50 per machine hour. And then shipment setup, this is shipping goods out, so this is part of your warehousing process. The shipping costs increase with the number of shipments, so it's $405 a shipment to set up the shipments. And then distribution costs increase with the cubic feet, so the cubic foot per product delivered, it's $5.80 per cubic foot. And the administration resources increases with direct labor hours, so we're going to allocate administration based on direct labor hours. So we've come up with, in this case, 6 different cost drivers for different activities. Now, to do this, we've had to do a lot of research. We've had to go send people, usually production engineers, into each of these areas to see what are these people actually doing and what are they spending their time on, what are the resources being used, and how are they being used, and how do we allocate them to the different things that they do. So that's kind of the process. And once we've done this, we can come up with a new allocation based on the new numbers. So we've taken our direct costs. We also found that in this, that we found another direct cost. Mold cleaning and maintenance costs we can directly trace. So we've taken, what, $270,000 out of the allocation pool and directly charged it to the, because it was easy to trace directly. So we've been able to move something into direct. Anytime you can move a cost into direct, you're going to get a better allocation. So we're able to directly trace those mold cleaning costs. So design, number of square feet, so we come up with different costs for each. So it's $135 and $315, so the $450,000 of design costs. There's much more of that goes to complex than simple. Machine operations, $637,000. We're using the cost driver there, so we end up with a lot more here, and so forth. And when we get to the end, we come up with our total allocated costs, which are still the same, the $2,115,000 plus the $270,000, same thing we had when we did it simple. But we've managed to move these into different places which we think are more accurate. And therefore, we come up with a different answer. We come up with a cost for the simple of total cost per unit of the simple at $49.98, and when we make 60,000 of them, and a cost for the complex of $132.07 when we make 15,000 of them. So if we compare with the simple costing, the simple lenses were $58.75, and now we think that they cost $49.98 using ABC. And the complex ones were $97 a unit, and now we think that they cost $132.07. Is that going to change my decision making? I think so. We've got a 30% increase in cost here, and about a 10% decrease in cost here. So we've made quite a change in how we're allocating costs. And as long as this is done well and is more accurate, we're going to make better decisions going forward. So ABC costing was first thought of academically and so forth in the 1980s. And the first large company to adopt ABC costing was General Electric. And General Electric adopted it in the late 1980s, and they implemented it throughout their systems. And it had, at least management literature would tell you, that it had a huge effect in allowing General Electric to be an incredibly successful and profitable company for about 10 to 15 years before anybody else, their competitors, caught up with them. They knew what their costs were better than anybody else. They were able to implement those. They were able to use that cost data to successfully compete against their rivals, and they were able to be more profitable because they knew what their costs were. Obviously, their competitors, Siemens and Honeywell and other big industrial companies, reacted by adopting ABC themselves. At this point, a very high percentage of large companies use ABC because it works better. Even though it costs more to implement and it's a pain in the neck, and a lot of people hate it when the industrial engineers come around trying to figure out what things cost, it's a very, very effective method of tracking costs, and it's used in a lot of places. So those of you who are out in the working world, you may be in a company that uses ABC, I don't know. But you should know how it works and why we do it. It's important for the success of the company, basically. It has also led to something called activity-based management. So ABC, activity-based costing, we've gathered all this data. We know what these activities entail. We know what they cost. Well, gee, maybe we should manage by activities rather than managing by products. And that has taken place in many companies, though not nearly as many as use activity-based costing, but there's a lot of activity-based management processes out there that are being used. So you'll probably run into that as well. So concluding this, the simple method and the activity-based costing are both mathematically correct. They're certainly both acceptable for generally accepted accounting principles, so they can both be used in financial statements. You end up with different answers depending on which method you use. And only overheads involved. The total costs for the firm remain the same. They're just allocated to different cost objects within the firm. So you end up with if you have a better cost system, you make better decisions, is really. So it's really a managerial accounting thing. If I can get better cost information, I can make better decisions. And you want to choose a method for a particular company that provides the best answer. There are some issues that you're going to be able to resolve by knowing your costs. You can make decisions about whether to drop a product or not drop a product based on costs. You can make decisions about whether to push one product over another or market it more heavily because it's more profitable, or you have a competitive advantage or something. Those decisions are going to be better made with better cost data. So whatever you do, it's not going to be perfect because it's imprecise. You want to get to something that's fair and reasonable. Companies that have lots of product diversity, so they make lots of different things, definitely should be looking more closely at ABC. Companies that have lots of indirect costs should be looking at ABC. And as our products have become more and more complex, there's many more indirect costs. So there's less material costs relative to other costs in most products today as opposed to 50 years ago. Information technology has both increased the complexity of products. It's also made doing something like ABC somewhat easier because it's easier to track costs than it used to be because of information technology. And then finally, if my competitor is doing something, I may need to do it. If ABC is better, and my competitor is using ABC, like the General Electric example, then I'm probably going to have to start using it too. So that competitive advantage for GE lasted 10 or 15 years before their major competitors all started using the same systems. So ABC generally gives you better answers, but it's only as good as your analysis. If you don't analyze your activities well, you're still going to get garbage. So garbage in equals garbage out in this model as well as lots of other models. It's only as good as what you've done work-wise. If you choose your drivers wrong, you're going to get wrong answers. So how would you decide you should implement ABC? you've got large overhead costs and you're using one or two cost pools to allocate them, that's probably a signal that maybe you should be going to ABC. You've got products that really are different and produce different amount of those indirect resources. You've got products that you should be able to successfully make and sell. Everything tells you you're doing things right, you're doing best practices, but you can't make any money selling them. Well, maybe you are making money, you just don't know you're making money. And maybe this product is miscosted. And then finally, my experience and the experience of others is that the people who are actually doing things often have a better sense of things than those who are implementing ABC plans. So if you've got operations staff disagreeing with your cost allocations that the accounting department is coming up with, then you've probably got a problem, because the operations people often know lots more about where the costs are really coming from than somebody sitting in an office. So listen to those operations people; they often know. So if you have disagreements, it's probably accurate. ABC, we've talked primarily about manufacturing, but it's used a lot for service and operating and merchandising firms as well. You see ABC being used in healthcare, banking, telecommunications, retail, transportation. And think about UPS. UPS is a big transportation company. Do you think that they have a lot of overhead costs that have to be allocated to things like ground service or air service or express service? And if they get those allocations wrong, they're going to not necessarily compete as well as they could if they knew what their real costs were. So it's important for every kind of company to have a good cost system, and ABC is certainly one that is used a lot. Okay, that's the last lecture. I've enjoyed class with you guys. There is a recording about the final, which is actually, I've recycled it from a prior class, but it's well done, I think, and will help you. And get ready for Quest 2, and I'm sure you'll all be successful at it. Thank you.